Dive into the explosive saga of Ethan Brooks, Karoline Levit, and the fierce battle against corruption. Like, subscribe, and comment below to stay locked on to the truth and power plays shaping America. The United States District Court of Virginia falls silent as Ethan Brooks wheels himself forward, his weathered hands gripping the rims with the same determination that once carried him through firefights in Kandahar. Steel and titanium support what remains of his body, but his eyes, sharp and unflinching, reveal a warrior's spirit unbroken by tragedy. Beside him sits Blitz, a Belgian Malinois whose military training is betrayed only by the vigilant posture and knowing eyes that scan the courtroom. The dog's paw rests gently against Ethan's wheelchair, a silent communion between survivors. "Your Honor, Blitz isn't just a military asset. He pulled me from burning wreckage when the IED hit our convoy. He's the reason I'm alive to fight this battle today." Ethan's voice carries through the chamber, steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. Judge Caldwell regards the pair with clinical detachment, shuffling papers with manicured hands that have never known combat. His response cuts through the room like winter wind. "Mr. Brooks, the court acknowledges your service, but sentiment cannot override legal precedent. Military service animals remain government property regardless of your attachment. The motion to transfer ownership is denied." A murmur ripples through the gallery. An elderly veteran in the back row shakes his head in disgust. A young woman furiously taps at her phone, the first spark of what will become a social media inferno. Ethan's hand moves to Blitz's head, fingers burying themselves in familiar fur. The dog whines softly, sensing his master's anguish. What none in the courtroom yet realize is that Blitz carries more than emotional support. He carries secrets locked in modified genetics and experimental training that powerful forces will kill to protect. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this isn't over," Ethan says, his quiet dignity more powerful than shouted defiance. In the back of the courtroom, Karoline Levit, White House press secretary, watches with narrowed eyes, recognition dawning that she's witnessing not just an injustice, but the visible edge of something far larger and more sinister. She slips out, phone already to her ear. The battle for one man's companion has just become the first shot in a war that will expose corruption at the highest levels of power and challenge the soul of a nation. The courthouse steps became a battlefield of a different kind as Clara Garner's thumbs flew across her phone screen, her face illuminated by the cold glow of righteous anger. One post. That's all it took. One post that would ignite a firestorm across the digital landscape. "They're trying to take Blitz away from my brother who lost his legs fighting for this country. The same dog who saved his life. #SaveBlitz." Within hours, the hashtag metastasized across platforms. Videos of Ethan and Blitz cycled through millions of feeds, the wheelchair, the service medals, the loyal dog who never left his side. America had found its newest symbol of injustice, a perfect storm of veteran abandonment and bureaucratic cruelty, all distilled into 6 characters, #SaveBlitz. Inside the White House, Karoline Levit stood motionless before 6 screens, each displaying a different news network, all converging on the same story. Her phone vibrated incessantly with urgent messages from journalists seeking comment on what had transformed from a routine legal proceeding into a full-blown administration crisis. "The optics are catastrophic," an aide whispered, hovering at her elbow, but Karoline's mind had already moved beyond political calculus. Something about Judge Caldwell's demeanor in the courtroom footage struck her as rehearsed, mechanical. She'd seen that look before, the look of a man performing his role rather than executing justice. Late into the night, the glow of her computer screen reflected in her determined eyes as financial records revealed the web of deceit. Offshore accounts. Shell companies. A labyrinth of transactions leading to one name, Blackthorn Dynamics. The same defense contractor mentioned in Ethan's military file, now funneling suspicious payments to the judge overseeing his case. Karoline leaned back, the pieces shifting into terrible alignment. This wasn't just about a veteran and his dog. Something far more sinister lurked beneath the surface. Something worth corrupting a federal judge to conceal. As dawn broke over Washington, 2 forces gathered strength. A public outcry that threatened to overwhelm the administration, and a solitary press secretary following a money trail into darkness. The battle for Blitz had just become a war for truth itself. The morning air in New Hampshire carried a bitter chill as Karoline Levit's government vehicle pulled into town, frost crystallizing on windshields like nature's warning of what awaited. Presidential orders rarely came with such urgency. Handle this immediately, Karoline. This dog situation is becoming a national embarrassment. She moved through the cramped government office with methodical precision, commandeering a conference room and transforming it within hours into an operational center. Walls soon lined with photographs, documents, and red string connecting seemingly disparate elements. A spider's web of corruption slowly revealing itself. The first discovery came at midnight, financial records showing Judge Caldwell's Caribbean vacation coinciding perfectly with offshore deposits from shell companies. The second came at 3 a.m., redacted military files referencing Project Guardian, an experimental biotech initiative involving combat dogs. By dawn, she had uncovered what few could imagine. Blitz wasn't merely a service animal, but a living repository of military secrets. They've engineered these dogs to carry biomarkers for experimental treatments, explained the nervous Pentagon scientist on her secure line. Blackthorn wants Blitz back because his blood chemistry could expose the entire program. Outside her window, Karoline watched as the town stirred to life, unaware that powers beyond their comprehension fought over a wounded veteran and his dog. Market vendors set up stalls, children waited for school buses. Life proceeded in blissful ignorance while she held documents proving that justice had been sold to the highest bidder. She thought of Ethan Brooks, his wheelchair barely containing his rigid military posture, refusing to surrender the only living being that understood his sacrifice. Karoline recognized something in him, the same unflinching resolve she carried into press briefings, where wolves circled for weakness. "I need everything on Blackthorn Dynamics," she instructed her team back in Washington. Board members, government contracts, political donations, everything. By afternoon, the picture emerged with terrifying clarity, not merely corrupt individuals, but a systemic capture of regulatory bodies, judges, and officials. An invisible empire built on war profiteering and secured through strategic silence. Karoline closed the file and stared at her reflection in the darkened window. This wasn't merely about saving a dog anymore. This was about dismantling an architecture of corruption that had flourished in democracy's shadows. The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence as the mahogany doors swung open with calculated force. Marcus Kane's entrance wasn't merely an interruption, it was a declaration of war. 6'3" of military precision, packed into an expensive suit, eyes cold as gunmetal scanning the room like targeting systems acquiring threats. "I represent Blackthorn Dynamics' interest regarding military asset K9 designation Blitz," he announced, voice cutting through the chamber. "This animal remains company property under classified military contract regulations." Ethan's knuckles whitened against his wheelchair. The mercenary's words hung in the air like poison gas, revealing what Karoline Levit had suspected all along. This was never about regulations or procedures. It was about ownership, power, and secrets, buried in Blitz's genetic code. Kane approached the bench with predatory confidence, sliding documents toward Judge Caldwell with practiced familiarity that escaped no one's attention. Something unspoken passed between them, a microsecond of recognition that Karoline Levit caught like a photographer capturing lightning. "Your Honor," Karoline stepped forward, manila, folder in hand. "Before these proceedings continue, the court should examine evidence of significant judicial compromise." The gallery tensed as she methodically displayed financial records on the court's projection system. Wire transfers, Caribbean accounts, properties purchased through shell corporations with suspicious timing. $750,000 transferred to Cayman account number 5591387 3 days after Your Honor received case assignment, Karoline stated, her voice steady despite the gasps rippling through the gallery. Followed by a similar amount after preliminary motions were denied. Judge Caldwell's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. "This is preposterous! I will not be slandered. The transactions correspond precisely with rulings favoring Blackthorn Dynamics in 6 separate cases," Karoline continued, unmoved by his outburst. Each decision systematically dismantling veteran protections while enriching defense contractors. The courtroom erupted, journalists frantically typed on phones. Clara Garner's live stream viewer count exploded into 6 figures as America watched justice unmasked in real time. Marcus Kane's hand moved imperceptibly toward his jacket, a motion Ethan recognized instantly from combat zones. The veteran's eyes locked with Blitz's, a silent communication formed through battlefield trust. Amidst the chaos, Rachel Harper slipped John Kessler's thumb drive to Karoline, the final piece containing Project Guardian's classified details. The chess pieces were aligned. The fortress of corruption suddenly vulnerable. Judge Caldwell's gavel slammed repeatedly, each strike more desperate than the last, the sound of authority crumbling under the weight of exposed truth. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Washington as two battles erupted simultaneously, miles apart but bound by the same corrupt forces. Outside the courthouse, Karoline Levit strode toward her vehicle, adrenaline still coursing through her veins from the courtroom confrontation. The telltale flash of sunlight on metal was her only warning. The crack of gunfire echoed between marble columns. Karoline's security detail reacted instantly, shielding her as the bullet meant for her heart-shattered glass instead. Blood streaked across her cheek as she was rushed to an armored SUV. "They're getting desperate," she whispered to James Thornton, who had gone ashen at how close Blackthorn had come to silencing their most formidable opponent. Across town, the attack on Ethan's modest suburban home came with military precision. Glass exploded inward as Marcus Kane's mercenaries breached the perimeter. Their objective: seize the dog, eliminate the veteran. "Target the animal with tranquilizers only," Kane's voice crackled through their comms. "Blackthorn needs it intact." What they hadn't accounted for was the bond forged in war zones. Ethan's combat instincts, dulled by civilian life but never extinguished, flared to life. Despite his wheelchair, he became the soldier he once was, calculating, ruthless, protecting what was his. Blitz moved like a shadow through the house, a blur of fur and fangs. This wasn't just an animal defending its master, this was a weapon with purpose. The dog took down a mercenary with tactical precision, teeth finding the vulnerable point between body armor plates. "They won't stop coming," Ethan growled, barricading himself and Blitz in the bathroom as bullets splintered the doorframe. "They can't afford to let people know what you are." The assault team regrouped in the hallway, switching to lethal ammunition. Orders had changed. The veteran was now expendable. Outside, sirens wailed closer, but help would arrive too late. Blood pooled on tile as Ethan pressed a hand to his wounded shoulder. Beside him, Blitz's eyes reflected something beyond animal intelligence, a consciousness, a knowing. In the White House Situation Room, Karoline Levit stared at surveillance footage of both attacks, her face bandaged but resolve unshaken. "This isn't just corruption anymore," she told the assembled staff, "it's war." The twin attacks laid bare the truth. Blackthorn Dynamics would kill to protect its secrets. The question remaining: what made one military dog worth such extreme measures? The answer lay in Blitz's DNA, in the classified files John Kessler had risked everything to expose, and in the terrifying capabilities neither Ethan nor America were prepared to confront. The digital fortress of Blackthorn Dynamics began to crumble as Karoline Levit and Rachel Harper descended deeper into its darkest secrets. Their investigation, once a simple pursuit of justice for a veteran and his dog, now unveiled something far more sinister, lurking beneath the surface of American defense contracting. In a secure conference room with windows tinted against prying eyes, Rachel Harper spread classified documents across the table, her hands trembling slightly with the weight of what they'd discovered. "Project Sentinel," she whispered, tracing her finger across redacted lines that couldn't hide the staggering truth. A $2.5 billion black-budget operation using military canines as living biotech storage devices. Levit stared at the schematics, horror dawning across her features. "Blitz isn't just a dog. He's a vault, carrying encrypted intelligence on global biochemical weapons networks inside his very cells." Meanwhile, John Kessler sat before a congressional panel, his security detail scanning every corner of the room. The former Blackthorn engineer's testimony flowed like poison into the waters of Washington's power structure. "These were not legitimate defense contracts," Kessler testified, voice steady despite the death threats that had forced him into protective custody. "Blackthorn weaponized these animals, then used them to facilitate arms deals with entities on our own terrorist watch lists." The revelations sent tremors through the Pentagon. Surveillance footage captured military officials rushing between secure facilities as decades of corruption threatened exposure. Judge Caldwell, whose black robes had once seemed impenetrable armor, now found himself implicated in 16 separate instances of judicial interference. Back at Blackthorn headquarters, emergency protocols engaged. Servers were wiped, documents incinerated, as executives prepared for the inevitable storm. Their stock plummeted 46% in a single afternoon. "They're burning everything," Rachel reported, watching real-time satellite imagery of smoke billowing from Blackthorn's research facility. "But they can't erase what's encoded in Blitz's DNA." In the White House Situation Room, James Thornton briefed a grim-faced cabinet. This isn't just another defense contractor scandal. If what Kessler says is true, Blackthorn has been running a shadow intelligence operation outside any congressional oversight. The public, initially captivated by the simple story of a veteran fighting for his dog, now witnessed the unraveling of an empire built on billions of taxpayer dollars and biological experimentation that defied ethical boundaries. As protesters surrounded Blackthorn's headquarters and #Project Sentinel trended worldwide, Levit knew they had reached the point of no return. The question isn't just whether Ethan keeps Blitz anymore, she told her team as they prepared for the next phase. It's whether our government sold its soul to corporations that turned living creatures into weapons and data storage. With each revelation, the true nature of Judge Caldwell's desperate efforts became clear. He wasn't merely protecting Blackthorn, he was protecting himself and an entire shadow network that had operated with impunity for years. The empire was crumbling, and those caught beneath its falling ruins would stop at nothing to silence the truth. The marble halls of justice trembled as Karoline Levit strode through the courtroom doors. This wasn't merely the final day of a hearing about a veteran service dog. It was the moment America would witness the collapse of a corrupt empire. Levit's briefcase contained what power brokers had desperately tried to bury: surveillance footage of Judge Caldwell accepting offshore payments, classified memos linking him to Blackthorn's darkest operations, and sworn affidavits from 3 former executives. The evidence before this court demonstrates not only judicial misconduct, but criminal conspiracy at the highest levels, Levit declared, her voice steady as she methodically dismantled Caldwell's facade of impartiality. Ethan Brooks sat motionless, his hand resting on Blitz's head, as 27 documented instances of judicial interference flashed across monitors throughout the courtroom. The gallery erupted, reporters fumbled for phones, the truth, so long suppressed, now streamed live to millions. Caldwell's face hardened, a man watching his carefully constructed world disintegrate. "This court will have order," he thundered, gavel striking wood, with increasing desperation. But there would be no more order under his corrupted authority. As if choreographed by justice itself, FBI agents materialized at each courtroom exit. Their leader approached the bench with deliberate steps that echoed through the suddenly silent chamber. "William Caldwell, you are under arrest for accepting bribes, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy against the United States." The handcuffs, cold, unforgiving steel, clicked around Caldwell's wrists. An audible period at the end of his reign. The man who had weaponized his gavel against a veteran now stood stripped of power, exposed before the very public he had manipulated. Outside, thousands gathered, their collective roar washing through the courthouse, as Caldwell was led away. Clara Garner's grassroots campaign had mobilized a nation. What began as a veteran fighting for his companion had unearthed a sprawling network of corruption that had infected America's institutions. Ethan knelt beside Blitz, whose canine eyes seemed to comprehend the significance of what they had survived together. This loyal companion, once reduced to classified government property, had become the unlikely catalyst for a reckoning long overdue. In the aftermath, as Justice Sarah Mitchell officially returned Blitz to Ethan's permanent custody, the true scope of their impact became clear. This wasn't just a victory for one man and his dog. It was the beginning of a systemic purge that would reverberate through corridors of power for years to come. The courtroom fell into a charged silence as Judge Sarah Mitchell returned to the bench, her robes settling around her like the gravity of the moment itself. The nation held its breath, millions watching live streams, thousands gathered outside the courthouse, all waiting for justice to finally speak. Mitchell's gaze swept across the chamber, lingering briefly on Ethan Brooks, and the faithful Blitz pressed against his leg. The veteran's hand trembled slightly on his dog's fur, not from fear, but from the weight of what they had endured together. "Having reviewed all evidence presented in this extraordinary case," Mitchell began, her voice measured and resonant, "this court finds overwhelmingly in favor of Mr. Ethan Brooks. Blitz is hereby declared the legal and permanent property of his handler, with no further claims permitted by any government entity or private contractor." The courtroom erupted. Years of suffering, months of battle, crystallized into a single moment of vindication. Clara Garner, tears streaming down her face, embraced Rachel Harper as the journalist frantically documented history unfolding before them. Karoline Levit remained composed, though the slight upward curve of her lips betrayed her satisfaction at watching justice finally prevail. Furthermore, Mitchell continued, once order was restored. This court recommends immediate federal investigation into Blackthorn Dynamics military contracts and the full extent of their biotech experimentation on service animals. Outside, the #SaveBlitz movement had transcended its origins. What began as one veteran's fight had catalyzed a nationwide reckoning with how America treated its warriors after they returned home. Signs bearing Blitz's image had become synonymous with resistance against institutional corruption. Ethan knelt before Blitz, pressing his forehead against the dog's. "We're going home, boy," he whispered. "For good this time." As they walked from the courthouse, the sea of supporters parted. Veterans stood at attention, saluting not just a man and his dog, but the principle they represented. The indictments against Blackthorn executives were merely the beginning, the first dominoes in what promised to be a sweeping purge of corruption. John Kessler, watching from the crowd, nodded silently. His whistleblowing had cost him everything, but seeing Brooks and Blitz reunited made the sacrifice worthwhile. The truth, so long buried beneath layers of classification and intimidation, had finally broken through to the light. The ripples of Ethan and Blitz's victory spread across America with the force of a revelation. What began as one man's desperate stand transformed into a movement that transcended political divides and touched something primal in the national conscience. Within weeks, the #SaveBlitz campaign evolved into something more profound. Veterans organizations, emboldened by Ethan's triumph, launched the Battlefield Bonds Initiative, a program matching service dogs with warriors whose wounds extended beyond flesh and bone into the shadowed terrain of the mind. Karoline Levit stood at the White House podium, her customary reserve softened by genuine emotion. "The President has authorized a comprehensive review of all military contracts related to veteran care," she announced. Behind her practiced diplomatic veneer, she remained vigilant. Corruption, once exposed, rarely surrenders without resistance. At Ethan's modest home, donations poured in. Not for him. He refused personal funds, but for the foundation bearing Blitz's name. Clara Garner managed the social media presence that had swelled to millions, coordinating volunteer efforts across 50 states. The movement had developed its own gravity, pulling isolated veterans back into the orbit of community and purpose. "I never wanted to be the face of anything," Ethan told Rachel Harper during her follow-up interview. "I just wanted my dog back. But now," he gestured to the yard where Blitz played with 3 other service dogs in training. "Now I see it was always about something bigger than us." John Kessler, his whistleblower status now a badge of honor rather than shame, worked alongside James Thornton to draft legislation protecting future veteran service animal partnerships. The system that had nearly destroyed Ethan now bent toward justice, reshaped by the pressure of collective will and unflinching truth. In parks and town squares across America, therapy dog events drew crowds. Veterans who had isolated themselves for years ventured out, drawn by the promise of understanding without judgment, connection without words. The fight wasn't over. Blackthorn's influence had tentacles reaching into dark corners of power, but something fundamental had shifted in the equation. The powerful had been reminded that even the most carefully constructed fortresses of influence can be breached when truth finds its champions. In a world shrouded by corruption and power struggles, the unwavering bond between a veteran and his dog symbolizes resilience and truth. Their story reveals that justice is not given, it is fought for relentlessly. Through courage, community, and unyielding determination, even the mightiest empires of deceit can be exposed and toppled. The fight for what is right transcends individuals. It is a collective call to action, reminding us that no system is beyond redemption when united voices rise.